All right, good morning, everyone. Once again, welcome to this exploration of the new K-6 social studies curriculum. And it's while it's an exploration of the social studies curriculum, it's also, I think, an exploration a little bit of all the new curricula. They're all structured in the same way. And as such, a lot of the things we're talking about here can be gleaned and applied to any of the new curricula. Because we are going to be looking at that mostly the way it's structured and how things work together to deepen students' learning. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge that we are on I am coming from Treaty 6 territory, but there are people from across Alberta attending this session today. We are on land that has been cared for and lived on for generations of the various First Nations and Métis communities in Alberta. And I took this picture. It is on a picture from Treaty 6 territory of the geese flying into the sunrise, actually, is what it was. They're flying out of the sunrise. Just again, a reminder that the land that we live on is vast, it's beautiful, it provides for us in so many different ways. And the changing seasons are miraculous to observe when you can stand in the same location and see how things change over one period of time. This is the location that I do several pictures at and have seen the seasons changing. And so it's with this picture that I acknowledge that we are on a land that has been cared for by many First Nations, by the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit for many, many generations. Um, with this session, we hope to accomplish a couple things with your leadership quality standards. First of all, for just being here, I think is really important for you to be learning deeper about the curriculum and about how things work together. As leading the learning in our communities, the more knowledgeable we are in terms of curriculum and good pedagogy, the more powerful we become as leaders when we're learning when we're helping our teachers and our coworkers learn as well. One of the areas, or one of the quality standards as well, is the providing instructional leadership. And I just hope this session can provide you some of that an extra perception, some extra information on becoming an instructional leader to help you when you do your walkthroughs in the classroom to be able to recognize quality teaching and to recognize when students are engaged in optimum learning experiences. So hopefully, some of the things we covered today will arm you with a few extra tools in your tool belt to see some of those things or to recognize that when it's happening in the classrooms that you visit. So really the goals of this session are twofold. Really, we want to unpack the new curriculum in terms of how it's put together and then take a look at how the different components of the curriculum work together to really deepen student learning. I think there's two ways to look at a curriculum of student learning. I was involved in a discussion a few weeks ago, and the discussion was, can a good curriculum replace poor pedagogy, or can poor pedagogy replace a poor curriculum? And there's agreement that with good pedagogy, teachers can take any curriculum and make the learning optimum for students and make the learning engagement optimum for students. So embedded in this is some pedagogy to perhaps take this curriculum and move it forward so it doesn't become too stuck on facts because as you know, and those of you who are familiar with this new curriculum already, from grade 4 up, even up to the draft curriculum, grade 7 to 9, there's lots of facts in here and we can easily get stuck on just the facts. So hopefully this presentation will open your eyes of how we can move a little bit beyond just learning the facts. I am going to just quickly glean on here. I'll leave these links here. Those of you who aren't familiar where to find the curriculum, they are in New Learn Alberta. Are you still seeing my screen in the New Learn Alberta site? Just a nod if you can see that. Okay. And Alberta's new curriculum is located in this site here. You can see the core curriculum is here and then some complementary curricula. You'll also notice that there are features of the curriculum and so on, and I believe grade 12 curriculum eventually shows up in here as well. When you click on these, for example, social studies, you'll see it does go all the grade 10 to 12. Those wouldn't be the new curriculum. The junior high does have the draft and the current curriculum, what will become the legacy curriculum. When we take a look at the new curricula through the electronic site, you can see it unfolds as you click along, and you can see all the different parts through that. Um, you can explore it that way. I prefer to go to print and select all and print a PDF. I find the PDF is easier for me to maneuver, more easily accessible when I want it. I can see the big picture a lot quicker. So no, you can just download the PDF version that way. Another part of New Learn Alberta, once you log in, if you don't have a login, get one by going through the help function at the bottom. You can go to need help and you can identify who you are and you can get a link to log in, your own personal link, and you can get into some other areas. The Curriculum Hub has a lot of helpful sites and documents for you to look not only at the social studies curriculum, but at all the curriculum, including some professional learning opportunities for you and your staff if you wish to look at them. So please know that this is there. There is also some parent toolkits there if you wish to communicate with your parents about information regarding the new curriculum. You can use the different information on this site. Um, When it comes to the social studies curriculum, though, there are some shifts that I'd like to begin with from the legacy curriculum to the new one. And those of you who already looked at has been exploring the new curriculum, you'll probably recognize some of these things that in the old curriculum, there were the different disciplines that often related to social studies weren't really highlighted necessarily the same amount in each grade. But in the new curriculum, there is through every grade an emphasis on history, geography, economics, politics, and citizenship in each grade. So you see those disciplines showing up more evenly and equitably distributed throughout the grades. New is a real stronger emphasis on citizenship, and that emphasis is across the grades, and we'll see it's its own organizing idea. In the old curriculum, it was just brought up in civics in just certain grades and not all grades. So that's another new shift from the old to the new. In the past, in the old curriculum, there were limited inclusions of first and respectful First Nation, Métis, and Inuit perspectives, and in not all the grades. There are now respectful, authentic, and inclusionary representations of First Métis, Métis, and Inuit in all the grades, and you'll see as you go through the curriculum that is quite evident where those parts are. And finally, another shift is that opportunities to support pluralism and learn about diverse peoples, that varied from grade to day. And now that whole sense of inclusion and pluralism is something that is included more visibly in all the grades and across the curriculum. So those are some of the highlights. If you haven't seen these already, there are some things called bridging documents. They could be helpful for you or your teachers if your teachers aren't aware of them. These are located in New Learn Alberta, and what they do is help the teachers look at. Maybe I'll click on one. This is the grade one bridging document. Um, is it breaks down the topics where it might have been in the previous grade, where it is in the new social studies curriculum, and some suggestions to help that grade one teacher bring that support and what they'll need to learn. So for example, when it comes to landmarks and communities, there was no related landmarks in the curriculum or the old kindergarten curriculum. In grade one, they do examine natural features and constructed landmarks. So the bridging suggestion is students practice recognizing landmarks in their communities because in the new curriculum, they are developing those understanding that concept. So it's expected that in grade one, if you're just starting in grade one, that those students already have that. They don't because the kindergarten in the year before did not have that. So you'll find these bridging documents available for grades 1 to 6. Because of the grade 7 to 9 are in draft mode, I haven't seen one for these just yet because the curricula are not finalized yet. Any questions up to now? All right. Those of you who worked with the new curricula know that the architecture of all the new curricula that have been released have a very similar architecture to them. And that's why I mentioned at the start that even though we're focused on social studies, hopefully what you can do is apply some of this to the new curricula as well, because we're in a sense creating a lens that we can look through the new curriculum that perhaps maybe a lens you haven't had before. I wasn't too sure what was going to happen with the grade 7 and 9 curriculum, the junior high curriculum. We know that all the K-6 curriculum was organized in the same way. And we find that now in social studies, physical and wellness, and math in grade 7 and 9, the organization structure is the same as well. So I'm going to quickly go through the components. And again, those of you who are familiar with this, bear with me. Again, like I said, we're not too sure if this session is going to reach beginners or novices in the area of new curricula or veterans. So we're trying to strike some middle ground here. So I won't dwell too long on each of those. The structure of each of the curricula look exactly like this one. It's got the different columns and rows, and each column and row has a certain thing. The organizing idea is really just what part of a discipline is going to be focused on. So when we talk about politics, for example, it's a huge discipline. What's going to be the focus? And the organizing idea will help us focus in on what aspect of um, those disciplines we're going to use. In this particular curriculum, there are three organizing ideas. We look at things through the lens of time and place, systems, and citizenship. And as an example, we're not going to give the example just yet, sorry. When we're talking about time and place, we're really talking about the relationships between people, places, and time. And I separated the description out a little bit just to add some perspective or emphasis, excuse me, on a couple of statements. So we're exploring these relationships between people, place, and time. And by doing that, it supports the understanding of perspective and events. And with that understanding, students help make meaning of the world. So it's looking at the interaction between those three to understand people's perspectives and to gain a different understanding of the event. Uh, Systems is looking at the processes and structures of organizations. In other words, the components that make up certain structures and organizations in our communities. And that understanding how those processes and structures work builds an understanding of decision making. So the emphasis is on decision making. Doesn't outright say it, but when you look at the different learning outcomes under systems, you'll see that there's lots. There's a row that will be focusing on economic decision making, and a row that focuses on political decision making. It's not it doesn't openly say that, but when you look at the learning outcomes, you'll see that that's what's being tended to. And finally, citizenship. And the focus of that is understanding of local, national, and global issues. By doing so, empowers the individuals to take action towards an inclusive society. So it looks at all aspects of citizenship. So it's through those lenses that we're going to look at these disciplines. And just a reminder that the organizing ideas and the associated learning outcome and cusps, I'll talk about cusps in a bit, does not imply a certain order. These don't have to be taught in order of time, place, then systems and citizenship. And the outcomes can be taught at different times. Teachers who are well versed in social studies and have a broad view and have lots of experience may start tinkering and moving different components around and create their own units, not necessarily depend on the way it's organized in the curriculum. And as well, same with equal weight. Not only is the order not matter, the curriculum does not assign weight to the various outcomes and cusps as well. So teachers have that decision to decide the time and the weight for those areas. Um, if we take a look at an example, then you'll see that the organizing idea for systems is evaluating processes and structures. We already talked about that, sorry. The guiding question then is takes that big idea and narrows it down a little bit. What is there about a system that we're going to look at? What systems are we going to look at? And what is it that we're going to look at? And the guiding system frames that and narrows that down. And the example of grade 1 social studies, the guiding question is in what ways can people contribute to communities? So we're looking at the system of communities, and by doing so, we're going to find out what are the components in the community and how do they work together. So we have the guiding question, and then the learning outcome comes from that guiding question, and it basically makes a statement about learning that comes from the focus that's provided in the guiding question. And remember, the learning outcome is what needs to be reported on to parents, and what they're able to do by the end of the grade. In the particular case of this one, then we can see how the learning outcome and the guiding question are very closely linked. Students investigate roles and responsibilities in community groups and organizations. So if we're looking at systems, we're looking at the components of roles and responsibilities and how they work together in a community or an organization. So when we talk about time and place, systems and citizenship, and we look at the lenses of economics, of politics, geography, and history, there's lots to look at. And so each grade has a content focus, and you'll see them listed right there. And that content focus is seen through the lens of time and place, systems, and citizenship. So, for example, in kindergarten, the focus is on culture, tradition, and community. And it's looked through the lens of time and place, specifically more place than time in their local community, systems in terms of what is there in the community, how do things work together, and what is involved in terms of citizenship and the local community. You can see the focus changes from the kindergarten one. From kindergarten to one, we bring in the idea of cultures. Grade two focuses on Canada, and grade three, Alberta. Grade four is where we start getting into the real historical components about Canada and the historical components right up to Confederation. Asian civilizations is taken a look at in grade five. And in grade six, we look at democracy and it's how it developed through time and place and how it operates in Canada today. A helpful document you may find is in the link here. I can go here, I'm going to copy this link here and I'm going to put it in the chat right away here. Is something I call the content progression. And I'll just give you a brief look at it and I'll put the link in and give you a couple minutes to open it up and download it and take a look at it. But what this content progression does is it takes, and I'm going to make it a little bit larger. It takes each grade, and the content focus is listed across, and you'll see those are repeated from the previous slide. And then the learning outcome. And by looking at the learning outcome, you can get a sense of what it is that the focus will be. In kindergarten, we're looking at places and communities, and then the traditions and histories of and how that is expressed. And then the content itself is places and communities and the cultures, histories, and traditions. And you'll see that happen across the grades all the way up to grade six. The next page does a similar thing with systems and then with citizenship. So it's really helpful, especially working together with the bridging documents that I mentioned. I'm just going to put this in the chat here. Feel free to download it right now. I will give you a couple minutes to download it before I move on and take a quick peek at it. But this document itself is really helpful for teachers when they're planning to see what are the kids coming in with and what are they going to need to know moving into the next grade. So it is helpful for planning that way to know what the emphasis are and to get the big picture of what's being offered in social studies. So I'll give you a minute or two to get that downloaded. While you're doing that, make sure you can open it up, make sure the link is working, and I will just pause too as we go along. If there's any questions or thoughts at this point, feel free to unmic yourself and share that. All right, so let's take a look at the three key columns that comprise the bulk of the curriculum: the knowledge, understanding, skills, and processes. Those of you who have been working with the new curriculum for a while understand that we often use the term CUSP when it comes to social studies, and CUSP line And when you hear that phrase, it's just the an acronym for the three columns: knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures. So I'll be referring to CUS throughout this presentation. I just wanted to make sure everybody was on board of what I mean by a CUS and what I mean then by a CUSP line. A CUSP line in the curriculum is a row of knowledge, understanding, and skills and procedures that's connected to the understanding. So in kindergarten, grade one and grade three, we would say the first cusp line in this outcome is this, and it goes across. So all this information works together. You'll notice that in some instances, the cusp line will continue on to the next page. And there is no understanding listed here. So again, that way you know that this information on the second page is part of the first, what we would call cusp line. And then when you get to a new understanding, there will be new information, new knowledge, a new understanding, and new skills and perspectives. So that's referred to as the cusp line as well. So when I make reference to that, that's what I'm getting at. Now, I'm not going to get into the knowledge parts right now or the understanding skills and procedures because I just want to pause a little bit about and talk about what I sort of mentioned before. It's and which is does pedagogy trump curriculum when it comes to creating optimum learning activities and powerful learning experience for our students? And sort of help that answer that question, I think we have to understand how the curriculum can work together to really deepen student learning. In other words, go beyond the facts, go beyond memorization and recall. And the new curriculum is, I think, structured well to help teachers who to move down that way of teaching. And so I just want to briefly talk about what I mean about deepening learning. Those of you have worked with transfer of learning and people like Julie Stern and Rachel French and whoopsie and others in the area of conceptual learning. And Hattie talks about this as well. We talk about those three phases of learning of surface, deepen, and transfer. And surface learning is where you learn definitions, we learn facts, or single concepts such as just what is democracy, what is autocracy, what do these things mean? And we learn about what they are, their definitions, and we find examples of them. But to deepen learning, what we're trying to do is connect those concepts together to create an understanding. So, and I'll give you some examples in a moment here. So it's not just understanding the singular facts, concepts, or just memorizing the facts. It's putting those concepts together and then applying those understandings to new situations. And transfer is when we can apply our understandings to really novel situations with more ease and more independence. And that's really what we're trying to do with students is deepen their learning so that when they are experience the world, they can transfer what they are learning in social studies or math or whatever the subject may be to their lives. And that's what the transfer component does. Um, I wanted to make sure to align this with something called depth of knowledge. And it's, you'll see it's DOK. Again, many of you are maybe familiar with this. And if not, I'm going to give you just a really brief introduction. But I think it's important to understand how these align with surface, deepen, and transfer. The depth of knowledge, level one, is just recall. It's the focus of facts, a reproduction of things that are already taught. If you Google it, if you aren't familiar with the depths of knowledge, you can Google it later and you'll find out more information about what kind of activities can actually happen that represent depth of knowledge. Now, I do have these as questions. So if you're observing a classroom and observing something and you ask this question and the answer is yes, if the focus is on facts, recall, or something that's previously taught, they're just regurgitating it, that's where we're at. If you ask the question is the activity or the thing happening or the assessment, is it focusing on the relationships between concepts or ideas using this conceptual understanding? And it'll make sense in a little bit later. What do you mean by that? And we move up a level to level three is the focus on inferencing or reasoning, non-routine problem solving, or making evaluations and arguments. that would be DOK level 3. So you can see we're moving up in complexity. And finally, the transfer is basically the same as level 3, but it's an activity or assessment that is complex, but it's iterative and it happens over an extended period of time to be completed. So you can think of inquiries and project-based learning activities would fit into the transfer component or DOK level 4. I just want to share this with you because when we take a look at the kind of learning that can happen with the new curriculum, it's really important to understand these components, especially surface steep and transfer. Any questions at this point? But if there are, please raise your hand or throw a comment out or interrupt me by just unmuting yourself. Okay, so in order to deepen that learning and to move from that surface deep to transfer, in other words, what we would want to do is move away from just the knowledge component. Now, the knowledge component is jam-packed with stuff because each subject area has knowledge, facts, symbols, rules, so on, that make up part of that learning outcome. In this particular case, then these yellow boxes that I'm putting here are taken out of the guiding framework for the development of the K-12 curriculum. In other words, as these curricula were put together, there was this guiding framework that the writers were using, and these definitions come out of that. So this is what knowledge is defined at in that guiding framework. And when we take a look at the outcome of students investigate the roles and responsibilities in communities and organizations, the knowledge that the curriculum identifies is, whoopsie, is not this. I just want to stop here and pause. Because I did talk about conceptual learning. I think we just want to pause and talk about the difference between fact and concepts. And just a reminder, fact is just something we can measure, we can say, we can prove or unprove a fact. And so you'll see here that I'm listing here many facts. And these are all just separate isolated facts, as you can see. Um, but when you stop and think, you probably notice it's all related in some way. And the way they're related and the idea that we create to bring those together, to group those together, is the concept itself. So it's a big idea, usually one or two words, that really helps us to understand and make sense of many facts and many examples. So in your back here, when you're sitting there, maybe you can think of some concepts to which all these groups or all these facts are related. There are many, and the one that I'm going to choose is the concept community. These are all examples of communities. Um, and so the fact that we have concepts in here is going to be really important and be able to recognize it if we want to deepen student learning. So here's an example then of some of the knowledge in the grade that we're looking at grade 1 curriculum. And what I just going to ask you to do is pause if you can see that. Just try to see if you can recognize any of the key concepts that may be in here. Each paragraph does highlight a certain concept. And you might have identified these. In this section, we see goals, roles, and roles is quite in-depthly explained here, not explained, but many examples of what a role is, and then what a responsibility is. So that's the knowledge that is produced here. And we can have kids just memorize these things and they become facts. And we can just leave it at that. We can ask questions such as what are the responsibilities of, or what kind of roles can a person have? What kind of responsibilities can a leader have? Can a participant have? And we could just leave it at that. But to deepen learning, we have to move beyond the individual concepts and facts. And this new curriculum helps us to move beyond just the knowledge and facts. I'm just going to do a sidestep again here. If I take those three goals, or three, excuse me, concepts that we just identified from the grade 1 knowledge of goal, responsibility, and role, you might want to ask the question, are these concepts related in any way? We usually often get a feeling that they are, and you can kind of see, and sometimes it's hard to articulate. One of the things, if we can get kids to practice doing, is articulating how things are related, That's moving up to that second level of deepening learning already, because they're not just memorizing what a goal, responsibility, and role is. They're showing how they're connected, and they can't connect them unless they know what they are. One of the ways to connect these things or relate them is to make a statement like this, that goals help establish roles and responsibilities. And that logical connection, if it to make a connection like that, it needs to be logical. And can we find a useful example, a factual example? And if we can, then we've got a logical and meaningful connection between those three. And I threw an example of here, for example, that let's say a class had a goal of having a sports day. And so the next thing they want to do is say, okay, let's have a sports day. We'll say, well, what needs to be done? What are some things that people need to do? So let's find out what roles we need. We need a cleanup crew, we need a equipment team, and so on. And then out of that, we say, well, what are the responsibilities of these cleanup crews or this equipment crew and so on? So by that example, we can say, well, that understanding that I just made is logical and meaningful because we can see an example of that. But concepts can be moved and related in different ways depending what you want your focus to be. We can say, for example, in this particular case, that roles and responsibilities support the achievement of goals. They aren't created, but they support the achievement of goals. And can we find examples of that? Well, sure. Once again, if there was a teacher had a group of kids doing snow forts, and she said, "Here's your role, here's responsibility. Now your goal is you got 30 minutes to build the snow fort. Who can do it?" And then talk about goals and responsibilities later. That if it got done in the time because um, everyone was carrying out their roles and responsibilities. So coming back before I took that sidestep, what I was saying is that in the knowledge part are facts and concepts, but to go deeper, we have to move beyond more than just the individual facts and concepts. We have to begin relating those ideas together. And that's where we get to this column. That's what the understanding column and all the curricula does when you take a close look at all of them. It connects those concepts in the knowledge and puts them together. Again, in the guiding framework, an understanding is defined as this, is that understanding is about putting pieces of knowledge, such as concept, goals, and responsibility, putting pieces of knowledge in a logical and meaningful order with other knowledge, putting it together. And so if we're to take goal, role, and responsibility and move it into the understanding, and then create that understanding that we just talked about, that roles and responsibilities support the achievement of community goals, that is exactly what is being looked for. That's the outcome. That's the understanding in the curriculum. Now, not only is the understanding putting those together, but now we apply that understanding to new situations. We can take roles, for example, just as an individual concept and do the same thing. What are the roles at home? What are the roles at school? What are responsibilities? What are responsibilities at home, at school? What are responsibilities if you're a pet owner? But that's just out the surface level. Now we're moving it on to something deeper. Now that students know what roles and responsibilities are, can we apply that understanding that roles and responsibilities support goals into some meaningful way? And now that's where we explore that understanding and give students those learning experiences for that. So, in other words, what contexts are there where we can explore the idea that roles and responsibilities support the achievement of goals? And there are many. For example, maybe building a miniature community in the class, or just talking about classroom jobs and team tasks in the school and really authentic. What's our goal when we go to phys ed? What's our goal with this project? And really just using authentic ways. Or again, they could do more fun ways. And what are some roles and responsibilities and that might help to slay a dragon in a magical kingdom, something. So again, some more imaginary things and creative things that students may want to go on. But you can see that there are a variety of contexts that can be created for students to explore that. And by focusing on that understanding, we can also bring in things like current events. And I had to hear, just you don't have to read through it, but it's just as a summary here. This is a current event that is not current, but it's ongoing. And I use this one because it relates to grade, can really relate to grade five and a couple other grades, even the same event. What happened here is in Pakistan, a dam was being built in a river that was going to flood parts of the Silk Road. And if you remember from your ancient history classes, the Silk Road was a huge trading route. There's the connection between Western Europe and the East that brought trades and everything and trade goods across the continents. Along that stretch where that was going to be flooded, though, there were many petroglyphs and all kinds of artifacts that were part of the Silk Road. So a lot of heritage, a lot of tradition there. And so that set up the whole question of, well, what do we do about it? And the communities got together, and at the end of the day, they started doing things to try to salvage and copy and preserve some of this before it could happen. Some people were against building the dam because of the Silk Road artifacts. Other people are saying, no, we need power here and so on. So there was a little bit of a discussion going on as well, but that's the story. And so when we take a look at an event like that, and that event is still going on, I believe. If we take a look at grade five, here's an understanding. It's that legacies of ancient civilizations continue. And so by pulling a current event such as this out, we can have the students read it and we can apply that understanding by saying, how does this case study or this event support the understanding that legacies of ancient civilizations continue? We could take the same story, and what I did, those of you familiar, I threw it into AI. I said, make a little short narrative story that a grade two person could read. And so we have the same idea, but now it's in narrative form because the grade two learning outcome or understanding, excuse me, is that community decision making can include diverse perspectives. And in the story, there was certainly a decision to be made about whether or not to build the dam, and different perspectives of local people, of architects, of planners, of engineers shared a perspective. And so the question to explore this or to apply the understanding can be done in this way. How does the story show that community decision making can include diverse perspectives? So the understanding goes beyond just memorizing it as a fact. Okay. It can be used to really generate really powerful case studies. And I'm just going to step back a step. When you focus on, we take a look at the concepts themselves to understand what responsibility is. We can even use current events and case studies to have students examine just a single concept. What are the responsibilities that you saw in this article? And just focus on that. Or if you just read or watched a video in class, read a story or watched a video in class, ask students, who are the characters in here? What were their roles? What were their responsibilities? So even just exploring those individual concepts to make sure they have them. And again, going back to the understanding. I just want to point something out. You'll notice that the complete understanding is different than the one I shared earlier because it has this addition of participation. So it really reads roles and responsibilities support participation and achievement of community goals. Um, and I think it's fair game, and a lot of teachers, it's really hard to try to deal with it all together sometimes. So sometimes it's good to break it apart, and we can ask the question and just focus on the bottom, the first part later on, that roles and responsibilities support participation, and explore, is that true? How does roles and responsibilities support participation? And we know that when we play sports, for example, or a game, having a role and responsibility in sports certainly makes it more pleasurable to play and so on. So so just to note that it is okay to parse the understanding because you still and treat them differently because they're still going to be both addressed, which is the important thing. And it's the understanding that really where the bulk of the teaching and the bulk of the learning and activities should really be happening is that understanding piece. Let's move on to skills and procedures. Oh, we're running out of time. I got to move fast. I'm sorry. Skills and procedures. That's this column here. And what they are what students do. And what they do to demonstrate what they know or what they understand. Question is, what do they do? What do they do? What are the skills and procedures? In this particular case, in this example, the skills and procedures are having students differentiate between roles and responsibilities or relate fulfillment of roles and responsibilities to achievement of goals and community, which is what we did with those building blocks. Asked how are roles, responsibilities, and goals related? That's a tough go, and you can see why relating was in that middle of that deepening part, which I talked about earlier. When you look at the skills and procedures carefully, if you're doing a walkthrough as an administrator and you're seeing some things happening, and want to become familiar of the lesson, and so you know where they are in the curriculum, know that if you see an example this where students are just talking about roles and responsibilities, they're working just with the knowledge. Okay, we're distinguishing between these two, but you can see clearly this other activity is related directly to the understanding. And you'll notice that when, whoopsie, and just coming back to that surface deepen and learning, if we were to ask the question, is the focus on recall or reproduction of thought processes? In a sense, it kind of is when it comes to the knowledge piece. And then when you can see with deepening, there's also the relating concepts together to form an understanding. That's uh, depth of knowledge 2 and 3. So that second activity, as you can see, is really a deepening activities, but this is still surface. And some people may argue it's surface or level 2 or whatever. The point is that it's focusing on the knowledge and the individual concepts. It's really distinguishing between roles and responsibilities, right? So that's why I would keep it at probably at the surface level, but it is comparing and contrasting. It is using a thinking skill to do that with, so it can slide into the depth of knowledge too as well. So by being armed with that, you can, and you're observing in the classroom and you're seeing what kind of things teachers are doing, you can help them understand, or you can understand better whether the activity that the student is doing is a surface level or a deep level activity, which we want the students to be. Some things to consider with the skills and procedures. A teacher can take any of these and use them either as a learning activity. And with the learning activity, it's not just that. I always stress to teachers that if students are doing something, it's an opportunity to watch and observe and talk, do that triangulation of assessment and find out and talk to the kids to see how they're doing to making sure they understand the understanding or the concepts. Or these can be used as a summative example. And you can use the same things depending on the context that you use. You can use a different case study, you can use a different picture, you can use a different video, and it could be your formative or summative assessment. As I mentioned before, the skills and procedures address either the knowledge or the understanding, and I'll just skip through that slide. And a certain DOK level. I forgot to pull those other slides out, so we'll just go past that. Another thing to consideration for then is that students really need to be proficient or sufficiently proficient at a skill before it's used for assessment. So for example, relating, if we just ask students to relate goals, responsibilities, and what was the third one? Goals, responsibilities, and roles, especially grade 1 level, they couldn't do it because it's tough. So what we need to do is make sure they can know how to relate. They've had practice in relating ideas together. Or if they're going to differentiate, don't just give students a summative assessment, say, okay, differentiate, and using that without practice of differentiating. And they could differentiate and relate things totally unrelated to the content because you're focusing on building those skills so that when they do it, they can, the focus will be on them demonstrating what they know and understanding rather than demonstrating how to differentiate or how to relate, which are two different things. So teachers, if their two students are struggling, teachers may want to go back and making sure that do some surface level learning. What does it mean to differentiate? What is that? How do you do it? What is it? What is the relationship? How do we make those things happen? And giving students practice and deepening their use of those skills before we use it as an assessment piece to help us decide where they're what they're learning. And finally, when I talk about making it conceptual to deepen learning, um, what I mean by this, when we get into the older grades, you can see the understanding ties things down to a certain time and a place. And it's really difficult for students to transfer that understanding. For example, I'm going to read this one verbatim. Technological advancements and interactions resulted in social, political, and economic environmental transformations of civilizations and empires. In other words, that understanding is focused on the past. But if we want to authenticate and get students involved and make connections to their real world, we have to take the key components of that understanding and kind of assess it out a little bit. But we go through a similar step and saying, well, what are the key concepts? When we take a look here, technological advancements are the idea of exchange or interaction or trade. And I use the word interaction here because that's what's used in the understanding. They don't use exchange, we call it interactions. And then economic practices um, are also identified in here in terms of but they call them transformations in the understanding. So when you look at the knowledge piece, then you can again focus on the understanding and do what I did with the previous example, grade one, where so I'm going to ignore the part where we're talking about participation for now. And I'm going to focus my understanding just on technological interactions with economic transformations. Because when you do take a look at knowledge, that's really what the focus seems to be. They're not talking about political, social, and environmental changes here. So I'm going to give my students this. And you notice I also took off the word civilizations and empires. So I'm going to have students just get the understanding that technological advances and interactions result in economic transformations. Say, was that understanding true? When we examine, now we can give students a different context to apply that in. And in this particular case, it may be with use of GPS and drones and computers in agriculture. And give students a case study on that and have them now apply that understanding in a current day context. And that's one way to deepen learning, to deepen that understanding, and to really instead of kids get, what is it? Sometimes the history is so far removed, especially grade five, we're talking about ancient history. This is one way by parsing down that understanding to its core concepts before we add on a time and place can help students engage a little bit more. And then once we do that, then we could take a look at how this happened in economic or in the ancient civilizations. Okay, this happening in Canada today, it's happening in Alberta today. Did this happen in ancient empires? Well, what was their technology? How did it affect them? What were their transformations? So that's what I mean. That's the process I suggest you may see visible happening in your classrooms to contextualize a little bit. And again, just another way to look at it by conceptualizing or taking away the factual parts of the understanding and just focusing on the concepts themselves, we can bring in current events to our classrooms and not just have students do the what, where, when, and how, but relate it to their understanding and go deeper and deeper with their understanding of those concepts and the understanding itself. That was a whirlwind. But I do hope by going through this and attending here today, you have a deeper understanding of the architecture of the curriculum, how the components can work together. And again, not only in social studies, I think perhaps the other curricula as well, and how you can when you do your walkthroughs, you can maybe look through what's happening in the classroom through different lens. Are the students learning at a surface level? Are they deepening? Are they focusing just on the facts and learning the historical parts and what's happening? And with that lens, perhaps be, more engaged with some of that instructional leadership component